So thank you so much, everyone, for joining me this evening for the second panel of Fashion Thinking, the launch of our second edition. We had a fantastic discussion earlier with our panelists for the first panel, and we had the privilege of having the editor, Faith Marshland, join us and also share a few details, which I'll share with you in a moment. I'm really thrilled to share with you that we have a companion website, which has now an additional resource that comes with the book. So when you go to the companion website, you'll be able to find additional content on each of our contributors. You will be able to see videos, you'll be able to see additional documentaries, interviews that have been created on their behalf. And so that's a fantastic resource that you can utilize and really augment the experience of the chapters that you're reading. So for example, like I'm thinking of Tiffany Huang, who has an augmented reality project, which obviously only comes alive. We can actually see that in the video form. So those videos are all loaded in. And Elaine Ng, who's on our panel tonight, her amazing video in techno-naturology and all of her wonderful work and documentaries that she's done since graduating in the. So in the fall of 2018, I was really thrilled when Bloomsbury's managing editor, Georgia Kennedy, reached out to me to ask if I would consider working on a second edition of the book. Fashion changes at such a rapid pace, and as educators, we're constantly updating our methods, our theory, and our practice that inform our pedagogy. It was so interesting to me to revisit the book that I had written 7 years prior. And I was pleased that after a really close review, the content still held up. I'll let you into a little trade secret. The first edition was initially slated to be entitled Fashion Process until the last moment, Bloomsbury countered with a new title suggestion of Fashion Thinking. And in hindsight, this was critical because historically speaking, there's a divide between theory and practice, between thinking and making. Fashion is still fighting for legitimacy within the academy and is often stereotyped as being superficial, not intellectual, not critical. Hopefully, this new edition will begin to bridge that gap. My ethos as a teacher informed this initial concept for the book. I wanted to ensure that students had a visual reference that showed them multiple ways into the fashion design process. There is no right or wrong method. To break the stereotype we often associate with fashion designers, we have to understand that not everyone starts with a sketch. In fact, some designers like Donna Karan don't even sketch at all and prefer to drape on the form. And others like Sandra Rhodes, the textile itself is the entry point. I often speak, as do many educators, about challenging the status quo. You'll see this formula that's represented here on the page: fashion plus X plus Y or Z equals what? A question mark. Because fashion is also seen in adjacency to other disciplines, in adjacency to other thematics, whether that is health, whether that is social justice, or whether that is politics, or whether that is textiles, as we'll hear tonight. Changing the way we think in order to deliver real change is incumbent upon all of us as educators, as we teach students to embrace the challenges that we're facing currently in society and think about fashion in new ways. What does it really mean to be a fashion designer? This is a question that we will pose to tonight's panel and we spoke about earlier. Talent is not enough. Students need to think critically and interrogate the issues facing society: racism, thin privilege, fat phobia, Eurocentric beauty standards, the list goes on. The responsibility is on us as educators to invest in training the next generation to think holistically about the discipline and consider this intersection. Establishing systems is crucial for any designer, whether as a student or further down the line in your career. The example shown here is from Zero Waste Design Process by Holly McQuillan, which she developed for her PhD, which I'm thrilled to hear tonight. She's published, and congratulations, Holly, if you're watching. The design cycle diagram that's shown on the right here represents the fact that ultimately design is a journey and each journey is unique. I emphasize the importance of iteration, doing many versions in order to gather critical information to inform the next step in the process. Embracing mistakes is critical, as this often is a place where we learn the most. Throughout my years as an educator, I observed two umbrella methods of working, which I called linear and random. We all engage at these at any point in our journey and process, and in many ways, these map to our personalities, whether you're organized or whether you're somewhat chaotic in your process. But at some point, you do need to make sense of it in terms of when you reflect back on your process. And it's helpful for students to recognize how they work to make sense of their own methodology. So reformatted into chapters, Fashion Thinking follows 10 designers through 3 phases of their projects: idea, research, and design. Each chapter is followed by perspectives interview from a variety of contributors, designers, journalists, and professors with expertise ranging across sustainability, zero waste design, textiles, fashion studies, anthropology, art, and design. My hope is that updates to the 2nd edition represent a generation of design graduates who are thinking differently about the future, who leverage technology in creative ways, employ universal human-centered design strategies towards more inclusive outcomes, who develop sustainable systems and approach fashion as an interdisciplinary project where issues such as health, wellness, politics, and social justice are at the forefront of their thinking. So now I'm very pleased to introduce the 4 contributors to Fashion Thinking for our panel this evening. The first person that I'd love to introduce is one of my fellow peers back in the day from Parsons, and we graduated together from the program. We won't say when. But Mickey Boardman is born and raised in Hanover Park, Illinois. He graduated from Purdue University in 1989 with a degree in Spanish. After school, he spent a year teaching in Madrid before moving to New York City to study fashion design at Parsons. He is described by BOF 500 as an institution in New York's social and fashion scenes, and elsewhere as a parody of fierceness. He is the editorial director and author of Ask Mr. Mickey, the column for Paper magazine since 1993, and appears as a cultural commentator, lifestyle expert, and fashion guru for multiple networks. Mickey is also described as a humanitarian and a philanthropist. He launched Mr. Mickey's Sidewalk Sale, and with proceeds going to SITA, a charity that builds schools, clinics, and women's cooperatives in India and Nepal. Additionally, he has participated in Doctors Without Borders, Coalition for the Homeless, and Red Cross Earthquake Relief for Haiti and Chile. In his latest weekly column for Paper magazine, Fat and All That, Why Do People Hate the F Word, launched in 2018, Boardman candidly shares his personal experience, speaks about embracing the term fat, and inspires his readers to love their bodies. Next up is Private Policy, Haoran Lee and Siying, who graduated from Parsons School of Design in 2015 as top of class and nominees of Designers of the Year in women's wear and menswear. Their thesis collections are featured on style.com as Caring, Empowering Imagination Contest finalists, Fucking Young, Bullet, Media, and GQ Style China. And after graduation, they both worked in the industry as Calvin Klein, Alexander Wang, Jason Wu, Philip Lim. And then they founded Private Policy together to offer fashion something fresh and exciting. They have been nominated as Fashion Group International Rising Star, selected as members of the CFDA Next Step program, listed on Forbes China 30 Under 30, and recently won the GQ China Present Award. Private Policy is a New York-based genderless brand, and it's dedicated to bring New York rebellious style and fierce free spirit to the world by focusing on one social political topic each season. Their Fall/Winter 17 collection received high praise from Vogue, New York Times, and High Snobiety as the most noteworthy arrival and leader for political statements at the men's shows. In 2019, Private Policy was named as finalist in the prestigious CFDA Vogue Fashion Fund. Last but not least is Elaine Ng, who's the founder of FABRICK LAB, that brings together textiles, electronics, biomimicry, interiors, and installations. She is a British-Chinese visionary, multimedia artist, and a graduate of Central St. Martin's in London, where she earned her MA Design in Textile Futures with distinction. Dubbed as the Techno Fairy by Elle Deco, Elaine is a TED Fellow and globally recognized, having worked with international design communities such as Nissan Design Europe, Nokia Design Beijing, with multiple design awards. In 2015, Elaine was the recipient of the Swarovski Designers of the Future Award, which acknowledges emerging studios and designers who are actively expanding design culture through experimentation with cutting-edge technologies. As part of the collaboration with Swarovski, Elaine unveiled Sundew, a design Miami basil that year, a kinetic creation inspired by the exotic and carnivorous sundew plant. The installation was also exhibited in Art Central Hong Kong 2016. Her work has been exhibited internationally, most notably at the V&A and Science Museum in London, eSpace, EDF Art Foundation in Paris, and Wuhu, Beijing, and Moleskine Global Galleries. Similarly, her art and design research has been featured in a wide variety of publications, including Wired UK, Elle Decoration China, Surface Asia, AD China, China Daily, and Core 77. Elaine has been invited to present at various prestigious international conferences, including TED, Do It, which stands for Delivering Innovation for Tomorrow, in Taiwan, Shapeshifting in New Zealand, and the Nature Now Symposium for the Costume and Textile Association of New Zealand, among many others. So we're very, very privileged to have this very prestigious panel representing so much expertise joining us tonight. We thank you so much for many of you. Several of you are joining from China, where it's very early in the morning. Our panel earlier tonight had the opposite, where we had folks that were staying up extremely late in Milan and London. So we're covering all of the time zones. So I wanted to start off some of the similar questions that we posed earlier to our earlier panelists were, given all that we've been through in the past year globally, is fashion still relevant? And why? Anyone can jump in. It's just an open question.
I think fashion is always relevant. I mean, look at us now. I mean, when I first came on the panel, I saw that everybody was very fancily dressed, so I ran and put my Dries Van Noten leopard print sweater on.
Pressure.
So even though everything has changed because of the pandemic and we're not necessarily able to go to stores and shop the way we once did, but I think everybody I know is shopping online, getting things delivered to their homes. We still get dressed every day, whether it's in sweatpants or more loungewear. And, you know, every day people have to wear clothes. So every day that people have to wear clothes, fashion will be important. So until we become a planet of nudists, fashion will be very, very important and often maligned and made fun of despite the fact that it is so important.
Yes, hear, hear.
And I think it's more because we're being so locked indoor, fashion or any garment reminds us of what time of day it is, the seasons, and bring us like better spirit. Because I've been in quarantine a couple of times already, you know, during all these days. You easily forget what time of day it is, and it's important to remind yourself and to associate with all the fabric, especially being a textile designer. Like having different like weighted fabrics really associate with the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet Siying, Haoran.
That's so true. I think actually in the very beginning of the pandemic and quarantine, many people questioned, that maybe actually fashion is not the most important thing. As fashion designers ourselves, sometimes, even though as much as we want to help and we do try our best, but we're like, we're not doctors. There's only so much we can do. But in the meantime, I think after almost a year in quarantine and then not be able to, you know, plan your outfit every day or just go out and have fun, and that make us really miss the time of not only, you know, when people talk about fashion weeks or shows, but also I think just the simple fact of putting on an outfit and then feel good through that. And then I think we really see how clothes really, we're proving it, is really do change our mood. I think me personally, I mean, I really even start to enjoy like think about what to wear for staying at home, and that kind of planning also helped me to keep up this mental, you know, health, to feel like, I'm doing something, I have a plan, I'm in control.
Yeah. So fashion is a lot more important than people give it credit for, right? Because we're always told that fashion's just, surface, it's superficial, and yet you're all starting to speak about emotion. It's a great slide to be on for looking at Elaine's project, where you were really thinking about the textiles, and maybe you could talk a little bit about your project. I know it's from your graduate thesis, which is so long ago, but then also how that led to the trajectory for you career-wise and where you are today with Fabric Lab.
Yeah, I think I haven't spoken about this project for about like 8 years now.
Yeah.
I mean, this project was about 10 years ago, and I started researching this 12 years ago. It was a full-on 2-3 years research project looking at how shape memory behaviors, it's all around us from nature, and how that inspire us to live smarter, create better materials that can interact with the environment, from change of moisture, temperature, and also UV, how the relationship with electronics that's created by human and how we can program it versus what we can find from nature itself. So that's why it's called a technonutrology, a balance between the work between nature and human beings' creation. And so one of the case study I did was pine cone, how the flecks open and close according to moistures. And that's something that's quite commonly known, but not a lot of people pay attention to the bio work of it. And that's when I really started to look into the biomimicry from the mechanical side of nature's work itself, rather than aesthetic. And I think in reality, you don't really get to really explore a project 2-3 years solidly without monetizing it. And that was really luxury doing my MA at St. Martin's, exploring the electronic sides, the weaving sides, and turning them into textiles, looking into shape memory alloys, shape memory polymers, and developing my own movable veneers and developing collections for museum. So after that, I was very spoiled in terms of the amount of time that I get to play around within one project. But quite quickly, I've got a great opportunity and land my foot into commercial design in automotive in England. So that was a little bit different from all this experimental work without having a real sort of context, although they're all perspective design, like as students, as researcher, you can really project the idea and design what you think it's best for the future. But in reality, you really have to execute them into a product that people can pay good money for, but one thing was quite lucky that I was involved in concept designs in automotive. So not everything has to be super practical, but it has to have the idea of validation, and able to bring the idea of these hybrid material philosophies into automotive design was really great, because there's so many parts in there, from the tactile work that you can actually feel and touch within your surrounding, to the interior structures of it. It's also very important. So that's slowly shaped my career from being a lot more research based to little bit more product related, and sort of explain to myself and understand that how textile design can actually land in other industry as color and material designers. And I thought that was very interesting at the beginning of my career.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it sort of leads us into this great question that you've all kind of tackled within, well, I know I talked with Mickey about it in the chapter, in the chapter in the book, but this kind of tension that exists between creativity and commercial viability. And I think a lot of students are struggling to sort of reconcile what they think are opposites between wearable or conceptual design. So I know that Siying and Haoran can speak to that. And I know Mickey has an opinion as well on this sort of tensions between all of these different fields that, may or may not exist in reality. So anyone can just jump in on that in terms of creativity versus commercial viability.
I think for us, it's definitely a learning process from our point of view, which is graduated from at Parsons as designers. Even with all the, we did plan to think about how we can, work with the market while we keep our message and identity for the brand, which is social, political topics each season. And then definitely there's a lot of practice and things to make it work, because especially when we started in 2000, like late 2015, when we started brainstorm the brand, preparing and launching in 2016, it's really quite like there's only so much we can imagine. But then we are just, what we know for sure is, I think it's very important, just hold on to what you really believe in and do not compromise that part. But then think about how kind of you communicate better with the customers or the market itself. So I think for us, in ways, we're learning how to communicate it better. It's not people are not interested in the core of the brand about, for example, here in the picture, the red plastic part, that collection was about enslaved Southeastern Asia fishermen, and how we made that conceptual translation into, we use plastic bag that has biohazard symbol of them, and they're usually, it's basically upcycled material that's like overstock from hospitals or medical supplies, where you put only supplies that touch blood into these bags for like secure and safe disposal. So we thought, oh, we want to use this bag that have this red color, have this symbol of biohazard symbol, and this like practical use of it. And then we use it as a conceptual, symbolic meaning of, some seafood we consume in supermarkets in developed countries literally are upon the backs of people who are treated like slaves to fish the product. So all these kind of stories, when you talk about it, sounds very dense and super dark for fashion, we talked about earlier. But I think it's just about how we communicate it on different levels. So we definitely communicate it through clothes in a conceptual way. It's not a giant slogan. It's not like that. And then we think about how to communicate it on level of shows and presentation, more visual. You just get a sense of the color. You feel the sense of the texture of plastic with like a layer of mesh, the feeling, emotions. And then we do provide information and resources while we talk about it, or show we publish like a newspaper looking press release every season that's available on our website for people to learn more about it, or we host events, or recently talks on Instagram Live to talk deeper about this topics we want to bring awareness to with other experts, or people who have done thinking within. So I think from all that through, I think that's when we more and more we realize people do care. They just need us communicate in a way they can feel interested and engaged.
Yeah. Vicky, as a journalist on the panel, and bringing a different perspective on like looking at fashion through a lens of commercial versus editorial versus image, et cetera, do you have a lot to say?
I have a lot to say about everything.
Always.
But I think part of it is as you get older, your opinion changes. I mean, I remember being at Parsons with you, and I think when you're young, you feel like it's all about creativity, and I will not compromise my artistic vision. And if we had critics or judges come in who would sort of suggest that we do something that was more wearable or that was more commercially viable, we were outraged and insulted. And it's sort of like success and happiness, creativity and commercial viability. In a way, you can't deny that commercial success is one measure of success. If a dress sells out or a shoe sells out, that is a success. That doesn't mean it's good or creative, but it means it's a success. The same way if something is brilliantly creative. But, I think as Siying was so clearly put it, you know, you have to kind of have a combination of both, I think, really, to have the best of both worlds. And, you know, and just what she was describing about their collection, like that's so deep and there are so many layers to that and it's so fascinating. And people think, oh, look, it's just a cute pair of red plastic shorts. But they also are very cute red plastic shorts. And if they weren't cute shorts, people wouldn't want to buy them, even if it was a fascinating, very deep, interesting story about fishermen. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, you kind of have to have all your bases covered, I think. So at this point in my life, I'm confused about what, you know, I think both are important, creativity and being commercially successful, because if you don't make money, you can't survive.
Exactly.
You have to survive. So, I mean, I think that and that's a problem. And as Elaine was talking about when she's designing cars, there are certain problems that need to be solved. And when you're a designer, you need to sell clothes and you need to make clothes that people want to buy. And that involves creativity, but it also doesn't just mean you get to do whatever you want and then people have to take it. People have to want it. You have to give them what they want. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but there you go.
I think it segues because we're on your page here, Mickey, and we're seeing the title around body positivity, philanthropy. And I know that obviously Siying and Haoran have already touched on the sort of ethos around their brand, around sociopolitical awareness and topics. And Elaine, you're talking about emotion and connecting that with the textiles. And a lot of the work that you're doing is very thoughtful. So you're presenting a variety of different perspectives of textiles and fashion and how they have a lot more than just the surface level to them. Fashion can be a platform, fashion can be an activation point. Just wondered if you would talk a little bit about that in terms of the emphasis that we often put on for students to change the system, to reimagine solutions. Also, we use this term, create jobs for themselves that don't exist, which is a new thing we've talked about for recently, because there literally are so few jobs that it's really up to students to sort of reimagine what jobs can be for themselves and to just be able to have that sort of nimbleness in doing that. But it's a lot of pressure to put onto students to kind of have to deal with these societal issues. So how did you do that in terms of when you were thinking about this work as students and coming together around this? And also, Mickey, you're already approaching this from your perspective as well. So just talking about any of that from all of your points of view. Jump in, anyone?
Well, I've got lots to say about that.
Good.
I had quite a difficult time to define my vision as a student, who I want to be or what I want to do after I graduate. So I kind of really want to carry on the research and continue to do my PhD right after my master. But I do realize after researching and studying for so many years, without practicing, you don't really know whether your theory is just theory or it is somewhat, it can contribute to the community and the industry. So that was one thing that pulled me aside and thought, okay, I'll start working and look for jobs. But in particular, I was trained as a weaver. There's still somewhat a couple of mills exist then in England, but not a lot around the world. So it was very difficult to find a job. You're competing with a lot of students and graduates. So, and I don't know where else to look for jobs because color material designer was not within our radar to understand it as a career. So I started looking for a lot of sales job that's textile related and thought that would open up what doors for me to access into textiles. And after working in a couple of sort of industry, from automotive to consumer electronics, a lot of people still very confused. Elaine, you're a textile designer, why are you working with all this hardware? But I kept practicing my own textiles on the side and kept my sketchbook on it. This is quite a funny thing. When you're a student, all you had was a sketchbook. When you start working as a design profession, probably might not be the same as for fashion, but it was very difficult for me to keep up my daily journal and my sketchbook on because you spend a lot of time to develop things. And when I left my commercial job, then I realized actually I couldn't find any facilities that I want in Asia in particular. I was in Beijing, and then I was looking to move to Hong Kong. And then there was no facilities that I can practice my skills. And so I find it quite frustrating. So then I started my own studio then. But I guess to a lot of students is quite sort of, don't be so fixated. That's what I want to say. Like, don't be so fixated of, if you graduate from fashion, that you can only be a fashion designer. There's a lot of careers and practice that's fashion related. A lot of interns and students I work with, there's a lot of skill set that's not covered in uni, because you concentrate on to develop your best collection, so then you can outstand yourself compared to all your peers. But then there's a lot of practical skills, like the way how you present, how to put things together. It's the most important part to pitch when you have your own business. And it sounds really boring how to make all this business plan that's interesting to showcase, and how to work the numbers. But it's all that makes it important and kept the business going. I mean, I was revealing like the 5 years work that I've been doing. I started my studio 6 years ago, and the first 3 years I had to go through the survival run. Like, I had any project, textile related to get it through and test out different markets to make sure I'm not missing out anything, and then also start working pro bono with a lot of people. So then I get experience, because you'll be so precious about your design at the beginning, but forget about that. I think keep on developing what you love, but I would definitely say you have to put yourself really out there, because everyone does put yourself out there, but you have to go extra miles.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Any other thoughts?
I think that the thing, we have this complex when we're young that, what's different about us makes us bad or is embarrassing, when in reality, as you get older, you realize that what makes you different is what makes you special and is your superpower. And so I think that, when I was at Parsons, I would do the things that I did that were the most me on a certain level got terribly received. Like I did this collection, the Supremes go to Shanghai, and it was like all Black models with blonde wigs wearing. Now you couldn't do it because it's cultural appropriation, but at the time in the 90s, it seemed okay. They were all in sort of like gold lame or silver lame Chong Sams, very, and it was sort of crickets chirping. But to me, the thing that I loved about it, it showed me, because it was music, it was pop culture. It wasn't really just, it was less about the clothes and more about the cultural concept, you know what I mean? Sort of something that was international and multicultural and sparkly and, things like that. And so I think that as we get older, we realize who we really are. And if we can bring those things that are really the most us to what we do, that's where the magic really happens. And I mean, it's not necessarily, doesn't mean that you'll do the most popular thing or the thing that's currently on trend, but that's why for me, for example, dealing with body image, fatness is at the core of who I am. It's like, it's absolutely been always a huge part of who I am, whether I like it or not. So it's important for me to deal with it because it's something that I just know so intrinsically and understand. And I think that if you could find those sweet spots, whatever they are, and bring the things that you care about to your work, that's really where the magic happens. And that's what makes you unique and special and brings a perspective that other people don't have.
That's a good lead into private policy and your perspective, which is quite unique around the political piece component to your work. Can you speak about that?
Yes. Well, Haoran, you can go.
Yeah. Be quiet.
Because it's the beginning, we thought about like how should we start a brand and make it different, because there are already a lot of like pretty things, beautiful clothes already exist in this world, and we really want to have a special point of view. And I think during the time of our graduation, we really thought about it. We sit here for a long time and talk about it, and think, and we think we really want to make our brand as a newspaper outlet, and then we can talk a lot of things that's relevant to the world, and bring awareness also to these events. And that's how we started the concept of this brand, Private Policy.
And how was that received when you launched that and understood? I know you talk about this in your chapter, but.
Yeah, I think definitely it took time. Like in the beginning, it also, because we were small, it's hard to communicate with people, and I think we had a really small audience in the beginning, but as we keep doing this and more people is getting aware of how the brand works, and each season we bring different topics, we bring different community to this game. So we accumulated more audience through the years. And more people would like to hear our new concept and new stories for the next season, and what we want to share to New York Fashion Week, to Shanghai Fashion Week. Also, we show in different places. So I think it's great that we can really share our ideas and concept to the globe, basically.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing about that. I think we talk a lot about identity, which taps into something Mickey said earlier around, your relationship to the word fat, the term fat. But I think that something we talk about with our students currently is also this terminology of the identity of fashion designer. So we talked on the earlier panel, we asked the questions, what did you think about that? And I know also, Elaine, you're coming from a textiles background, so you could answer it from that perspective. But when you were thinking about these terms and what you thought that represented before you ever became part of the discipline, and then what you think about it now, what has changed about your perception of being a fashion designer or a textile designer, and what has informed that shift in thinking? Like, did you buy into stereotypes around those things? And, if so, what were they? And maybe in a good way, those stereotypes are changed. Hopefully you're part of changing that.
That's such a good question. I think I definitely didn't buy in, or I tried to fit into the idea of being a textile designer, but that didn't work. And I've been trying for so many years, because everyone said, oh, Elaine, I don't really understand what you do. You work with electronics, you're fashion designers because you work in textiles, because a lot of people in Asia felt if you're a textile designer, then you work with fashion designers, but there's a lot of other stuff that you can do with textiles. And I think that's and for me also, like fashion, a lot of time you look in silhouettes, there's a lot of context. It's not just clothing that you're looking at, it's like system contributions and narratives. That's why I find fashion is so powerful. And I think identity is something that you have this, it's like soul searching in a way, like it's a lifetime career for you to define who you are and throughout. And I think that's something very interesting. Whether you work for a brand or you develop your own brand, it's always very good to keep yourself, like your own style, like be agile, but also have a core of yourself that you work around with. So then you're not lost if you all of a sudden you change a job, then you say, oh, I don't know what to do because I worked in this job for 5 years already. That's all I have. But that isn't, because remember when you were growing from college, you were growing out from nowhere. You didn't have stuff, but you were growing from nothing to a great collection. That's why you graduated, and then you were applying the skills set to work for someone else. And of course, I love collaborating and working for different clients, long term, short term, because that's also part of the growing journey and building my own identity of knowing actually it is okay not to be a typical textile designer, and openly explain to people my work is a little bit uncanny, and if you expect I can do your regular run for fashion, but if you're looking for something else, I can also do that. So it's really to open the conversations and not to be afraid to be different in a way, because humbly, I think especially at the beginning of the career, to keep seeking opportunity to learn. I think that's really one of the best way to help you to, or myself, to morph and shape. And I'm still learning at the moment. And now and throughout the journey, I love traveling, and I've been doing my projects in Guizhou, working with ethnic minorities, building system and hubs with them for women empowerment projects, silicon textiles, and how turning the handicraft into something a little bit more modern, so then we can work with department store and sell them to bring them into more income. And now the same model that I've learned in the past 7 years in one village, I'm learning and shifting that into the Philippines. So I think it's okay. And one thing is really important is not to be too fixated. And it's good to attach, but don't be too attached into one idea.
Right.
I have so much love with the women in China, and I still do. But when you think it's time to move on and to start testing the new models, then do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just reading off this question because it's on your slide, Mickey. What designers or brands are getting it right in terms of inclusivity? We talked about this. It's a big pressure on us all to really shift. Like, it seems real. It seems like in terms of also diversity, inclusivity, these are the buzzwords, but are we in a moment where this is finally going to shift for real and move beyond tokenism? The one fat girl on the runway, the one plus size, the one black model, etc. Do you think we're going to see a shift?
I hope so. And to me, ironically, a brand that I would mention that I think is getting it right is a brand that got it wrong for so long, which is Gucci. And they were sort of called out, like when they copied Dapper Dan, that was sort of the classic thing to do, like for a big global brand, copy a person of color, or, he wasn't young, but a young designer, a smaller designer, and steal it. And when they were called out on it, they sort of said, okay, you're right, this was wrong. And they did a collaboration with Dapper Dan, and they've put actual things into effect that are changing how things are. And that goes from the workers who are in the store in Soho to the people who work in the company. And, it's fashion. On some level, people think like, oh, it's so progressive and so modern because it's so filled with women and gays and non-white people. And really, fashion is kind of one of the most backwards, unprogressive businesses in the world, because everything almost that we do in fashion, we do only because that's what's always been done, not because it's the best thing for the designers, not because it's the best thing for the customers, just because that's how it always is. You have to do a fashion show because everybody does a fashion show. It has to be at this time of the year because that's what's always happened. And I'm thrilled that, and I think that the good thing about this pandemic is it's forced people to sort of say, look, I have to decide what works for my company. And if that means showing in Shanghai or showing in New York or not showing anywhere, or showing men's and women's together, or not selling in department stores and just doing direct to consumer, you're sort of forced to make those decisions. And those are the decisions we should have been making the whole time, not just kind of going along with everything that everyone's always done. So, I wish that I had lots and lots and lots more brands to mention who I feel like are getting it right in terms of diversity. I think it's great that a lot of brands are, or that a lot of Black-owned businesses like Aliette by Jason Rembert, like Christopher John Rogers, Asian designers like Jason Wu, like Philip Lim. I think that they're like Prabal Gurung. I think that it's great that they're getting attention, but they need to continue to get more attention and not just have it be kind of a reaction to being called out on only having too many white people. And I still think that the easiest way to make it in fashion is to be a cute gay designer with a little bit of talent. If you're photogenic and gay, you're fucking in vogue immediately. You know what I mean? And that's just, I love a cute gay, don't get me wrong, but there are very non-photogenic, talented people who get no attention.
Right.
There are people with very little talent who are charming and cute who get tons of attention. So, and I'm maybe just as guilty of that as a lot of magazines of, wanting to cover people. Also nepotism, you know, it's like if you're the celebrity child, you immediately get more attention. You know, we could go on and on and on and on. But
Yeah.
I do think that things are changing. I do think we're seeing more diversity. We're seeing more body positivity. Like having Shio Minotti hired at Vogue, for example, having Samira Nasser at Bazaar. You know, it's important to have non-white people in these positions because, you know, at the end of the day, I'm a gay, but I'm a white suburban man. So if I have the power to make these decisions, I'm coming at it from the perspective of a privileged white suburban man. And there need to be people with other perspectives and other identities making those decisions too.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe Siying or Haoran, can you speak to, I don't know, any of the parts of pieces of Mickey's comments? Are they resonating?
Yes, I think definitely this pandemic is forcing us to take actions on things we may have thought about. We're like, wait, do we have to, you know, have so much, you know, traveling for fashion, for example, or do we have to? And you always think about it, but you're afraid to make the decision. But this pandemic really forced us to be at home and think. You know, I think that's also the whole social movement, Black Lives Matter, and a lot of other things that people brought up. I think maybe just because we have time to think now, finally, the whole globe have time to think. And those environmental issues, you know, there's pictures of showing you what happens if we just, you know, wow, for a couple of days, you know.
Beijing, the smog is gone, right? In Beijing, right? You're in
like
Beijing.
around the world, it's just amazing. Or you feel how much you appreciate the ability to be able to move around, and just we don't take it for granted anymore after this year. I think within fashion too, within ourselves, I think I see a question there. Just I want to answer that before we run out of time. About the Fisherman collection, that was basically our very first collection that was showed in New York Fashion Week, and we were just in the beginning of, you know, building the brand and combining fashion and social political issues. And then so even I mean, what's consistent is that we definitely did not pay money, or we did not rescue Fisherman for that collection. But that's why Haoran has mentioned, we thought about it. We're like, oh, do we want to focus on one issue and really make a difference for that one issue, or is our interest and ability more as a fashion designer what we train for and what we good at in somewhat? And then we thought about, oh, maybe bringing awareness is the key for our brand, and what me and Haoran are good at and be able to do with the press power we have. You know, whenever we launch a collection, we have so much press, and we're like, oh, and celebrities are wearing, and people asking, what's your concept? We thought instead of saying our concept is just about, oh, a flower, we thought, oh, maybe we can talk about something a little bit more meaningful for everyone. So that's how we bring awareness. But then as the brand goes on, I think we, especially with we ourselves, even I think that goes with the social movements today for fashion, we educate ourselves every day. We try to keep open-minded. For example, we're having a collaboration with Chilaman, who is he works with the hearing impaired or disabled community. And then for working with him, and then I learned so much about sign language, or how a lot of little details, and so intriguing, and it sparked a lot of creative ideas within our private policy team. So I think, and or about you know, different sizing of more diverse sizing, or how we perceive body within fashion is also a process for us in the very beginning to unlearn and then learn again. What we unlearn is what we, you know, since we grew up, you know, we look at magazines, we look at the books, everybody we worship, all the designers are a certain way, and the models they use are a certain way. And today we go away, but we never asked why. I never asked, do we like that, or is that how we want to represent our brand? And then we start to learn about sizing, grading, and then what's, you know, how do our customers in different sizes, not just, you know, per se plus size or extra large per se, and also the ones who are always petite and they're like, all the pants are too long for me, and they complain about that a lot, especially in our Asian market. And we're like, oh yeah, sorry, we never thought about it. We always made model size, that's size medium, and they have long legs even. us as a designer, when we put on like, you're right, it's really long, or there are sellers who would give us feedback and say, oh, your sizing for some jackets are small for my clients. We're like, oh, you're right, let us have more fitting, more different body types to try our clothes, to try to, be more diverse as much as we can. Definitely clothes today, it is ready-made, it's not custom-made, cannot fit everybody. But I think definitely to keep that in mind and think about the social impact we can have with all the powers we do have, that we want to do as much as we can.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. We have a question in the chat, which is asking Ruthie, who I know, thanks for joining, Ruth. Do you think the pandemic has forever changed fashion, how Fashion Week is done around the world? Great question, because I was just about to say something about that. So I'm going to let the panelists take that one.
Yes.
Okay. It's not a yes or no, really? That's your answer?
No, I think, and a lot of people have done virtual shows, and I think a few have been successful. I think most have not. And I think that the ones that have been successful have been people who've, like the Balenciaga video game, like the Margiela documentary with John Galliano behind the scenes, like that. I mean, John Galliano, as problematic as he's been, that documentary, I don't know if you all saw it, was genius to me, and it reminded me of what a genius he is. And it was just a simple behind the scenes thing of him Zooming with Pat McGrath, or him talking with his team about how to do the draping. It's things that, again, that take advantage, that weren't just like, we can't do a show like we've always done, so how can we imitate it digitally? But instead, people saying like, okay, we can't do that. We're going to present our collection in a different way. How can we do that in a fabulous way? So I think that people, have learned that they can do that successfully, and it's, more, in a way, it's great. And there will never be anything like being in the front row of the Chanel Couture show. That's always going to be magic on a certain level when the clothes are great and the atmosphere is great and you're in a beautiful location. But I think it's going to not be necessarily the norm. It's going to be these kinds of other projects. And there have been other things even before the pandemic. Two of my favorite things ever, fashion presentation wise, were once Rodarte did sort of a lookbook that they put on Instagram. They just kind of Autumn de Wilde shot their favorite friends and movie stars, and they kind of put it up throughout the day on Instagram. And it was better than any show that I've ever seen of theirs, because the clothes were great and it was really their vision. Like, it was styled beautifully. And another was Tom Ford did that Lady Gaga music video, that disco song. Do you guys remember that?
Yes.
I don't know if you remember, because I've been to many Tom Ford shows and he's very glamorous, but you know what I mean? It's like, I don't need to see another Tom Ford show, but that was the best money he ever spent, to have models like Mika and Lucky dancing to this disco song with Lady Gaga. It made such an incredible impression and got seen around the world. So I think people need to do more stuff about that. Yeah. And just to flash back also to what Siying was saying, I think is exactly it. And it's like, I'm a journalist, you guys are designers, Elaine's a textile designer / car designer beyond definition. And what we can do is bring this knowledge and awareness to what we do. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a teacher, I'm not going to build a school or teach students someplace, but I'm a fashion person and I can get free clothes donated by designers that we then sell to have money to do those other things. So I think that if every person in all different walks of life uses their position to advance these things in a way, the world will be a much better place. And I think that's what all of us in a way are doing. So congratulations to all of us.
Wow, perfect ending, Mickey. Just a phenomenal wrap-up conclusion. We ended our earlier panel as well on a similar note, and saying that we hope that coming out of this pandemic, on the other side of it, we will remember what we've learned, and we won't sort of spring right back to old habits and dysfunction and perpetuating stereotypes, but that we will really remember. I love what you said, Siying, about thinking, using this time to think, and really acting on that. And so thank you so much for all of your time this evening and the conversation, and sharing all of your wonderful perspectives in the work, and giving us hope and optimism that fashion can change the world. Thank you so much for all of our attendees as well, who have stuck with us until 9 o'clock tonight. Maybe it's because you're in Zoom or in lockdown or in quarantine, that this is, you know, we have a captive audience in so many ways, but we're thrilled that you could join us. So please go ahead and check out the book on the Bloomsbury site. I put the link in the chat a few times, and also make sure you apply the discount code. And also follow up and look at the companion website, where you can see extra wonderful work and videos and interviews from all of these wonderful contributors here. So thank you so much.